everyone, it's Jenny from jccards.com. I've got two cards to share with you today, both of them featuring dry embossing. One of them uses a die to emboss and the other uses a stencil. I'm going to show you both ways to do this. Today's video is part of Video Hop celebrating the new release from Catherine Pooler Designs. For the next stop on the hop, be sure to see the detailed description below. For each card, I'm going to show you the sandwich to use in your die cutting machine. I'm using a Spellbinder's Platinum 6 here, which shows you what you need in order to dry emboss with your dies. Your machine may be slightly different, so if you have a Big Shot or another machine, so make sure that you Google the right sandwich for the machine you're using. I'm using cold pressed watercolour cardstock, and I find that dry embossing works much better if you lightly spritz with clear water before running the cardstock through your die cutting machine. I'm laying down the cardstock on top of the die in the position that I want it to emboss. I'm adding a tan mat and then an embossing plate on top, and then I'm running it through. And what you'll find when you remove the mat and the plate is that the die will lightly press into the cardstock, and if you've used the water spritz or your cardstock is thick enough, you won't get any cracking, and it gives a great impression. The die I'm using there is the Thank You Layered die from Catherine Pooler Designs' new Snowy Day release. I'm now going to do some ink smushing. So I've pressed two colours of Catherine Pooler inks in Shea Butter and Rose Petals down onto my craft mat, and I'm spritzing with lots of water so that the ink beads up. I think I've broken my distress sprayer, so I did actually move to a mini mister afterwards. And then I'm just tapping another sheet of cold pressed watercolour cardstock into the ink, drying it with my heat tool, tapping it back in again, and then drying it again to get this pattern. I'm now spritzing it with some shimmer spritz and drying it again, which gives a great shimmery look. I've now gone ahead and run the piece through my die cutting machine using the new Peaceful Flakes dies. These have coordinating stamp sets, but I found that they look great on their own as well, and if you don't cut them apart before you use them for die cutting, they cut some great shapes out of the centres as well, which is what I've done here. I'm using liquid glue to adhere the pieces down around the embossed thank you, and in one case I've strategically placed it so it covered up a dirty mark that I'd accidentally got on there. And then I'm also using some foam tape to place a few more flakes around the thank you for dimension. And you can see that one in the top right corner, you can actually place a double layer and it looks great if you slightly rotate it. So you can get lots of different shapes with these dies. I'm then going to trim any of the dies that are overhanging and adhere down the panel to a white card base using craft foam to add a little bit more dimension. And just as a finishing touch, I'm going to add some of the new Catherine Pooler Aspen sequins. These sequins are a great mix, and they've also got a few snowflakes inside them, so I had to pick those out and add them just for a little bit more sparkle, and that completes the card. For my next card, I'm going to be dry embossing the new rose stencil that comes from the Smitten release by Catherine Pooler. And I'm going to show you this again. You can skip ahead if you don't want to see this again. I'm using cold pressed watercolour cardstock again, which I've spritzed with water, although you're much less likely to get cracking with a stencil because it's nowhere near as thick and it doesn't have any cut lines. And I'm just placing the tan mat and the embossing plate on top and running it through again. And the dimension you get with a stencil is a little bit more subtle compared to using a die, but you do get some great texture, and you can of course leave it like this. But I'm going to use the same two colours, Shea Butter and Rose Petals, to do some ink blending. So I'm using my new makeup brushes as blenders, which are awesome. If any of you have seen these, I highly recommend grabbing a few. They blend great. And first I'm ink blending Shea Butter across the top, and then I'm ink blending Rose Petals up from the bottom. Be careful with overlapping these two colours, because they can create a little bit of a murky brown if you overlap them too much. I've spritzed the panel with some Heidi Swapp Clear Shine, and then I've used the Love Connection dies from the new collection, and I've die cut the smaller circle 5 times from Premium White Cardstock by Catherine Pooler. I'm then tracing one of them with a pencil onto some Catherine Pooler vellum and roughly trimming it out. It doesn't matter too much if you don't get a perfect circle, you just want to make sure that there's no edges peeping out. So you'll see in one case here I did actually have a little bit peeping out, and that's easy enough to resolve. So I'm adhering with liquid adhesive the vellum to the back of the shape, and you'll see there's a slight overhang there, so it's no problem. Just take your scissors and snip off the edge and then place it under an acrylic box to dry. I'm adhering all the other 4 rings together and then popping the final piece with the vellum over the top, and this gives a thick dimensional top for our shaker card that we're going to be creating. I'm using some Doodle thin foam strips, which are just the right thickness to go round the back of this without peeping out from the front. I did double check because I really didn't fancy cutting it any thinner, and it worked perfectly. So I've run that all the way around the back, leaving no gaps, and then I'm adding some sequins. These are also from the new Smitten release, and I've added them into the centre of the card and placing the vellum panel directly over the top. For my sentiment, I'm using the new Doodle Hearts stamp set from Catherine Pooler, and I am using the sentiment, I'm stamping it in Versamark ink directly into the centre of the vellum, which I have already treated with a powder bag, and then I'm heat embossing it with white. In hindsight, I would recommend stamping it before creating the shaker. However, as long as you get your heat tool very good and hot before you take it to the piece, it should emboss very quickly and you won't get any warping of the vellum. As a final touch, I rounded the corners with a 1/2 inch rounding corner chomper and added some more of the inspiration point sequins, and that completes the card. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, please feel free to consider subscribing to my channel or try these other videos for more inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye!